Today, we're going to prove the Bolzano Weierstrass theorem, which states that every bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. In a previous lesson, we proved this same theorem using a couple previous results concerning monotone sequences. However, today we're going to prove this result using fewer previous results. The only big result we're going to use for this proof is the nested interval property, which is stated here, and I'll leave a link in the description to my lesson proving this property that we're going to use for today's proof of the Bolzano Weierstrass theorem. The nested interval property simply states that if we have an infinite sequence of nested closed intervals, this infinite sequence of nested closed intervals has a non-empty intersection. So there's actually some element for sure that belongs to every one of those infinitely many nested intervals. And that's going to be really useful for our proof of the Bolzano Weierstrass theorem. Again, this theorem states that every bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. So we're going to use the fact that our sequence is bounded in order to contain it within a closed interval, and then we're going to cut it in half over and over again and look at an infinite sequence of nested intervals which must have some common element in their intersection, and then we're going to prove that our subsequence converges to that common element. So that's just an overview of how the proof's going to go. Let's get a start right now. We begin, of course, with a bounded sequence, since the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem concerns bounded sequences. So we say, let an be a bounded sequence. Now, what does this mean for a sequence to be bounded? Well, it means there must be some number that we'll call big M. There exists some big M greater than 0, so that every term of our sequence has an absolute value that's less than or equal to big M. So we could say there exists this big M so that the absolute value of our sequence an, just a generic term of our sequence, is less than or equal to m. This would have to be true for every term of the sequence, so for every n in the natural numbers. And again, this statement just comes from the definition of a bounded sequence. Our sequence is bounded, so this must be true. And since this has an absolute value, what this means is that all terms of our sequence must lie between negative m and positive m. So this closed interval between negative m and positive m has to contain our entire sequence. Here's what we're going to do next. We're going to bisect this closed interval, which contains our entire sequence, into these two closed intervals. So we'll bisect negative m to m into the closed interval from negative m to 0 and the closed interval from 0 to big M. Now consider this. How many terms of our sequence are in these two intervals that we get from bisecting this one? Well, this one, remember, contains our whole sequence. So together, these two intervals also need to contain our entire sequence. Because of that, and since sequences are infinite, at least one of these closed intervals must contain infinitely many terms of our sequence. If both of these closed intervals contained finitely many terms of our sequence, that would mean that our sequence has finitely many terms, which is not the case because every sequence by definition has infinitely many terms. So here's the big takeaway. At least one of these closed intervals, perhaps both, but certainly at least one, must contain infinitely many terms of our sequence. Whichever one of these intervals it is, if it's both, just pick one, call that closed interval I1. So this interval I1 has infinitely many terms of our sequence. We're then just going to take any term from that interval. Call that term an1. This is going to be the first term of our subsequence. We're creating a subsequence that in the end we're going to show is convergent. Because remember, the goal here is to show that our bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. So this term from the closed interval I1, this term that we're calling an1, is the first term of our subsequence. Now we're going to repeat this process infinitely in order to create an entire subsequence. Now we repeat this process of cutting an interval in half to I1. When we cut I1 in half, Again, one of those half intervals, at least one of them, needs to contain infinitely many terms of the sequence, since the sequence is infinite. Whichever one it is, call that half I2. That is going to be, again, a closed interval that contains infinitely many terms of our sequence. And it is one of the halves of I1, which means that I1 contains I2. Now, from this closed interval I2, we will just take another element to be the second term in our subsequence. But not just any element from I2. Since I2 contains infinitely many terms of our subsequence, we just want to pick one of them whose position in the sequence is after the first term that we chose for our subsequence. So perhaps AN1 was A3, for example. Maybe it was the third term of the original sequence. Then we want to make sure that we're picking something from I2 that is after the third term of our original sequence, something like A10 or A20. Certainly we can find such a term because I2 has infinitely many terms of our sequence. So for sure we'll be able to find some term that comes after the first term of our subsequence, something that comes after that in the original sequence, so that N2 is greater than N1. We're going to call that term AN2. That will be the second term of our subsequence. There's a lot going on here, so let's take a look at this picture, which might help make it more clear what is going on in this proof. Because our sequence is bounded, we know that it all exists between negative m and positive m. Then we bisect this interval into two halves, this half and this half. At least one of these halves needs to have infinitely many terms of our sequence. In the picture, I've made it this half here. And so this is our first interval, I1. It's got infinitely many terms of our sequence, and we can just pick some term from this sequence, let's say this one here. And that's the first term of our subsequence, AN1. And then we repeat that process. We cut this interval I1 in half, so then it's this half and this half. At least one of these halves needs to have infinitely many terms of our sequence. In the picture, it is this half here, so that is I2, the closed interval that is half of I1 and contains infinitely many terms of our sequence. And then again, we pick a term from this interval to put in our subsequence. In particular, we pick a term that comes after the first term that we chose. Perhaps that's a term like this, that guy there, and that could be AN2. So that's a picture of what's going on in this proof. The next step would be to cut this interval I2 in half. So then we'd be looking at this half interval and this one here. At least one of them must contain infinitely many terms of our sequence. Maybe it's this guy on the right. And then we would pick a term that comes after AN2 in the original sequence, which might be a term like this guy here, and that would be AN3. Now, let me point out that this could indeed come after AN2, right? Because our sequence can jump around. We're not saying that the sequence is monotone, it's just bounded. So it can jump around. It could be that this number that's less than AN2, it's less than AN2, but its position in the sequence could be after AN2. That's what we're actually interested in. So that could be the third term of our subsequence. We just want to make sure at each step we're picking a term for a subsequence which is further along in the original sequence. So here is the description of what we're doing in general to construct our nested intervals and to construct our subsequence. In general, construct the kth interval, ik, by taking a half of the previous interval, ik minus 1, take a half of it that has infinitely many terms of our sequence. At each step, at least one half of the interval needs to have infinitely many terms of the sequence, since the sequence has infinitely many terms. Then take an ANK from that kth interval such that the position of ANK, which is the number nk, that is the position of the term, make sure that position is after all of the previous terms in our subsequence. Again, for each term that we take, each ANK, we want to make sure that we're moving further along in the original sequence. So at each interval, we're taking one of those terms that's further along in the sequence, and now we've got a subsequence, and we want to prove that this subsequence, ANK, that is created by picking out terms from these nested intervals, we want to prove that this subsequence is convergent. If we can do that, we will be done proving the theorem. Now, of course, to prove that ANK is convergent, we need some candidate for its limit. What is it converging to? This is where the nested interval property comes in. Consider the nested intervals that we've constructed. I1, I2, I3, each one being an infinite half of the previous interval, a half that contains infinitely many of our sequence's terms. Then, by the nested interval property, we are guaranteed an element, say x, that exists in the infinite intersection of all of these nested intervals. There's some element x that belongs to every single one of them. This is going to be our candidate for the limit. We're going to prove, this is what we want to prove, that our subsequence ANK converges to this common element x. Now that we're beginning a convergent sequence proof in earnest, we begin with let epsilon be greater than 0. Classic. Now, what we want to consider is how wide our intervals are. The terms of our sequence are all existing in these nested intervals. How tight are these intervals getting? Well, the length of each interval ik is simply 2 times m times 1/2 to the power of k. Because, for example, we began with this whole interval from negative m to m, but to get our first interval, I1, we cut that in half. So when you let k equal 1, we get 2 times m times 1/2. And so the length of our first interval was just m. And then, of course, after that, continuing, each interval is just half the size of the previous one, and you can see how this half will just be getting raised to an increasingly large power. So the length of each ik is just 2m times half to the k. That's really important because, in fact, this expression for the length of each ik is converging to 0. This is because any sequence of the powers of a number whose absolute value is less than 1, any sequence of the powers of a number whose absolute value is less than 1 has to converge to 0. This just gets smaller and smaller, and certainly multiplying it by some fixed coefficient does not change that. It's still going to converge to 0. I'll leave a link in the description to my lesson proving that result for sequences of this kind. So this means the intervals in which our sequence exists and in which this element x exists, these intervals are getting arbitrarily small, and that's going to make it pretty easy to show that, for sure, our sequence gets arbitrarily close to this element x, because the terms of our sequence and x both exist in these intervals that are getting really, really small. So since the lengths of these intervals converge to 0, we can find some number big N so that every interval, ik, after the big nth interval, is going to have a length less than epsilon. We can find this number big N so that when k is greater than big N, the length of ik is less than epsilon. Eventually, the lengths of our intervals get as small as we need them to be. Then, since we know that each ank has to be an element of the kth interval, ik, because this is how we constructed the subsequence, each interval ik gives us the kth element of our subsequence. Since ank is an element of ik, and by the nested interval property we got this element x, which also belongs to ik, since x belongs to every single interval, it belongs to the entire intersection. Because ank is in ik, and x is in ik, the distance between ank and x, so we'll write absolute value of ank minus x, the distance between them has to be, for sure, less than epsilon, because they both exist in an interval whose length is less than epsilon. Since they both exist in an interval whose length is less than epsilon, their distance from each other certainly has to be less than epsilon, and that completes the sequence convergence proof. So, since the terms of our sequence eventually get within epsilon of the desired limit x, we know by definition that our subsequence a and k converges to this number x. And that completes the proof of the Bolzano Weierstrass theorem. We began with a bounded sequence, and then we constructed this subsequence that we just proved converges. Hence, every bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. That's how you prove this theorem using the nested interval property. Hope you got a kick out of it. I think it's a pretty cool proof. I adapted this presentation largely from the book Understanding Analysis by Stephen Abbott. It's a wonderful book on analysis. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions or video requests.
Head in the clouds like a little balloon, scaling the stratosphere, coming